if you didn't see the dunk contest, some dude that may live on your street won it. He's a no name. He is like 6'2", and he can jump through the gym and did a 740, which is the first time I've seen that. I mean, when do we get to the point where we're doing like 3 spins? I don't know, but it could happen. So the most unlikely great players in UT history. Now, do you just want to go basketball here or go football or the whole 9 yards?
Well, since this is kind of a Grant Williams transition, I was going to go both because the story with me with Grant Williams is he was an Ivy League kid. He had 3 Ivy League offers. His mom works for NASA. Super nerd if you've ever covered him, and then became a 2-time All-American. So he's like the Josh Dobbs of college basketball, and Josh Dobbs is on the list for me.
Okay, so most unlikely player to emerge in Tennessee athletics. Let me get your thoughts on the message boards. Go ahead and post that right now, because I got to be honest with you, I'm gonna need some help because it was football in particularly. I covered the guys with the most stars, right, Caleb? Because they got the most attention.
You covered the era that was loaded with talent.
Yeah, and I'm really having trouble with thinking. I'm having trouble thinking of a guy that came in and I was totally stunned that he was good. So I'm going to keep thinking about that. As far as basketball, now I do have a couple. Skylar McBee was one that I was going to throw out there. Another one that I was going to throw out there that I thought was really good was Del Baker, because Del Baker got the offer and joined Tennessee's team the year before his brother, Vincent Yarbrough. So I always thought that was just kind of a throw-in, that they had to get him. They also hired those guys as a high school coach. So I just thought Del Baker was a throw-in, but turned into be a very good player. Aaron Green, I think, was a very good player. And Juwan Smith, I didn't think that he would be on the same par. I'm not saying he was as good as Chris Lofton, but he was on the same level of being a great shooter, just not quite as good. But man, I'm struggling with football message board. Help me, please, because I'm having trouble thinking of a guy that just kind of came out of nowhere.
Well, I have to give you a shout out for Juwan Smith. I think that's the ultimate overachiever. I don't even think he was, I remember Tennessee basketball recruiting, and I just went back and looked back at 2004. He wasn't even on the list of their commitments that year. Like, the guy was just a country kid from Cleveland. No, I just went back and looked, and it's just came out of nowhere. And he never played that last year under Buzz Peterson. And then Bruce Pearl puts him in against, ironically, Rick Barnes in Texas, which was, remember that big win over Texas, his first signature win at Tennessee? Bruce Pearl throws Juwan Smith in, and Juwan Smith gets red hot shooting the ball. The next year, Juwan Smith is starting next to Chris Lofton, and is quite honestly, look, Chris Lofton was the best player, and then Tyler Smith came, but Juwan Smith was the leader of those teams. He was kind of the heart of those 2 teams. And like that, he's the best overachiever, I think. And I know Fred hates the term overachieving. Juwan Smith was an overachiever. That was a legitimate overachiever.
Yeah, Fred will remind you that he ran a 10-2 in the 100 meters, so that's not an overachiever. I cannot come up with one in football.
Oh, I got a football one. It's more your time than mine, but Chris White, 1985.
See, that I didn't know players top to bottom then. So, like, I knew Johnny Jones, but I didn't know. I mean,
Chris White stepped in at safety and had 8 interceptions, came an All-American.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Daryl Dickey himself too.
Well, I was going to say Daryl Dickey, and the other one who had Tennessee's all-time interception record. How about Tim Priest?
It's hard for me to judge interceptions from like that time because it was like.
Well, but I don't know what kind of recruit he was either.
That's true.
So I'm having a lot of trouble.
What about Juwan Jennings moving? What about Juwan Jennings at wide receiver? Remember, Jennings was
I saw Jennings. I saw Jennings in high school, and he was playing quarterback, and I thought that guy is a deer. I mean, he runs like a deer, and I was. It's funny that came to my mind a couple of minutes ago, but I wasn't really surprised. I will give you one. I'll give you 2. Both in the defensive backfield. I thought Jonathan Hefney and Jabari Greer both had size issues, and I thought that would prevent them from being fantastic players. But it didn't. They were both very good players. Jabari Greer went on to a great career in the NFL as well. I'll tell you one that I had underrated that showed up on camp that I was like, whoa. Because when Kevin Burnett signed with Tennessee, I thought of all the great linebackers before him. And I thought, with the Al Wilsons of the world, I thought there's no way he can compete with those guys, right? Wouldn't you have thought that? And then I remember they used to have freshman days when they would open camp, and you'd have 2 days just devoted to freshmen. And he did this speed agility drill with Jabari Greer, and he hung with him, and he's 40 pounds heavier. So I was like, oh, okay, that guy's got crazy physical ability. Jabril Wilson is a good one. Junior college guy that had a nose for the football. Good job, John. Very, very good job.
Laid one of the greatest hits I've ever seen, too, against Kentucky. Physical guy.
Yeah, I remember interviewing Larry Slade about him. I said, what makes him so good? Because he made some plays in some scrimmages when they were open. And he said, he didn't mean it mean. He goes, are you watching? He said he's just around the football, had that nose for the football. I'll tell you another one that I think we say this too often because a player just happens to be Caucasian. I think we get in those stereotypes. Will Overstreet.
See, I have a hard time with Will Overstreet, and Bernard Jackson was the other side, right?
Yes.
I think you and I could have played defensive end on that team with who was in the middle.
Well, but if you remember Bernard Jackson, his nickname was Godzilla or something, and he was supposed to be the best defensive end that Tennessee had gotten in a number of years, or since Sean Ellis or whatever was the case. So on the flip side, to have Will Overstreet outperform him, that was definitely a surprise from their freshman year forward. So if I can kind of couch it a little bit like that, I would say that I was surprised.
What about this one? So I don't know if you can call it unlikely good player, because he was a starter, but I'm going to be mean here and say he never should have been starting. And I think there was just some likability factor with him. But Ryan Carl.
Oh, Ryan Carl's good. Ryan Carl's good. I'll give you another one that sounds crazy in retrospect, but I didn't think he had the size, was Raynoch Thompson. I didn't think he was the way he hit people. When I saw early scrimmages, I thought that guy's body is not going to hold up. And it did. And it did through the NFL and a decent career in the NFL. So while I thought he was every bit as athletic as Al Wilson and the other guys on that team, I did not think that he had the size to have a long career, and he did. So Raynoch Thompson, in a weird way, kind of maybe fits your mold, maybe.
Yeah. Do you think maybe, I wonder if you think, because you're talking about, you talk about how you got caught off guard with size with Raynoch Thompson and Kevin Burnett, and I'm thinking this was right around the time where you've told me that John Chavis started recruiting smaller linebackers to hang with Spurrier's offense, and that's how he figured out Spurrier's offense. So it seems like Raynoch Thompson and Kevin Burnett may have been recruited specifically for that, right?
Oh, my man gets a shout out. Yeah, with Burnett, he was faster than I thought. With Raynoch Thompson, he was not as big, and I didn't think he would have a long career. But John is my man. Steve Johnson, my broadcasting buddy. We had classes together. And yes, Steve Johnson was on a team that was loaded at defensive back. He caught the interception that wrapped up the Fiesta Bowl for the national championship, if you remember. Steve Johnson was not as talented as the other guys, but had a fantastic career. And I still remember the disgusting sweaty hug he gave me after the 98 Florida game. And broadcasting major. We had a lot of classes together. And Steve Johnson is a very, very good one. He's one of those guys that on pretty much any other team or any other era, Caleb, other than 98, 99, he's the starter, hands down. He is your starter, right?
Yeah, definitely. I would agree. But he was starting with what was that secondary that year? Because you had Dwayne Goodrich, Fred White, Deion Grant. God, that's a who's who of.
And Steve was the other corner.
He was the other one, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, so they were pretty darn loaded. And so that's a very good one, John. John's throwing high heat today. There's no question about it.
You know who would have been on this list, by the way, is we would be talking about him more than any of these others. Would have been Inky Johnson, if not for the injury.
Yep, 3-star.
Yep.
Definitely would have been. Definitely would have been. And the one we haven't mentioned, Travis Stevens.
Yeah, redshirted just so he could have a year to himself to play.
Yeah,
And,
was ridiculed by one media member to his face that may have been on this program that didn't think he could get it done against Florida, and he ran for 220 plus yards.
that media member was not me.
No, that media, not this specific program, but has been on this program maybe Friday. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, and we have to be honest here. Stevens had a good cut and good breakaway speed, but to be objective about it, that might have been the best offensive line of Vollmer's entire tenure at Tennessee that year.
That's true, but he had a little neat thing going where I thought he saw holes and he was a patient runner.
He was. And he was right. And remember, Will Bartholomew may have been the best blocking fullback. That was a time when the blocking fullback was still a thing. And Will Bartholomew and John Finlayson at tight end, they were starters at fullback and tight end specifically because of how great of blockers they were. So Stevens really had 7 elite blockers that he was running behind at the time.